Lay down a list of what is wrong, things you told them all along. Pray to God he hears you, and pray to God he hears you. And where did I go wrong? I lost a friend somewhere along in the bitterness, and I stayed up.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Backfired, an NBA history podcast about bad teams, bad luck, and bad decisions. My name is Lewis. It is the morning after the Memphis Grizzlies home opener, a very exciting overtime victory over the New York Knicks. A game-winning layup by John Morant in regulation wiped off the board because Jalen Brunson drew a charge on Ja's drive. They got the victory anyway, the Grizzlies did, which is all that matters to me. Fantastic game, well worth the price of admission to see John Morant play basketball 41 times a year. But yeah, today we're going to talk about first-round draft picks that teams moved on from after one season, or in a few cases, parts of one season. And this could be for a variety of reasons. Either the player just was not good, which is a good enough reason to move on from somebody in the NBA in its own right. Or what's often the case is that they're involved in a trade that someone is making for a much better player. But nevertheless, the team still deems them expendable enough to move on from them after just one season. And the reason I'm doing this episode, one, is because I heard the news of the Utah Jazz moving on from Jared Butler earlier this week. A seemingly promising young talent. I know he barely played, but Utah's in year one of a rebuild, and he was thought to be first-round talent before his health problems. He is not in this list because he was not a first-round pick because of those health problems, but that is what gave me the inspiration. But second, it's something that's very interesting to me on a philosophical level. If you're drafting somebody with a first-round pick, that is a multi-year commitment that you're making to that player. Now, at pretty much any time, the team can do something like trade the player or cut them to renege on that initial commitment that they made by drafting them. But since the 1995 collective bargaining agreement, which is the CBA where rookie scale contracts were first introduced, drafting a player in the first round signals that that player, if everything goes right, will be tied to the team for more than one season. That's what the rookie scale contract implies, in a way. By drafting someone in the first round, that is at least 2 seasons before the team's third-year option, and the options after that come into play. So for those who don't know, let me explain briefly the rookie scale here. So this was a major point of contention during the 1995 NBA lockout, which did not cost the league any games like the 98-99 or the 2010-2011 ones did. But this lockout, which was the first in league history, was very important because before 1995, there was not a standard uniform contract that was offered to each player based on their draft position. First-round picks could ask for any conceivable number and really had a ton of power over the organizations that they were drafted to. There were some really insane contracts by today's standards. Glenn Robinson, 10 years, $68 million. Chris Webber, 15 years, $74.4 million. Salary cap circumvention was rampant in these pre-1995 rookie deals. My favorite example that I've mentioned on this podcast before is Penny Hardaway's rookie deal. When he signed his rookie contract with the Orlando Magic in 1993, it was 13 years, $45 million, with an escape clause after 1 year and a $20 million line of credit provided by the Orlando Magic. So his average annual salary for that deal, which he opted out of as soon as he could because he had proved in his rookie year that he was worth more, was around $3.5 million. But he had instant access to $20 million in credit. And that didn't count against the salary cap for the Orlando Magic at all. So giving players extra perks like a line of credit or a car or access to a private jet, things like that, that was legislated away in 1995, but the rookie scale contract was meant to just make negotiations more simple for the teams, curb holdouts, which had really crept up in the early 90s and led to a lot of players skipping training camp and even missing games at the beginning of their rookie year. Now, the rookie scale was bad for the top players in each draft class from a financial perspective, but the players gave and took in those negotiations for sure, and this just got a lot of them on the court a lot quicker. So the rookie scale, which has changed slightly in the time since it was introduced, gave a set salary for each first-round draft pick for the first 3 years of their career, all fully guaranteed. Now that's changed since the 1999 CBA and the second lockout. Now it is 2 guaranteed years. The third and fourth years are team options. And then the player can either sign an extension after their third year or enter restricted free agency after their fourth season. And the starting salary varies based on their draft position, like I said. So the highest starting salary is pick number 1, of course. and it descends on down to the final pick in the first round. For second round picks, it is not required to fully guarantee their deal, but you can. Plenty of teams have done that for, players at the top of the second round. But for example, the number one pick in the 1995 draft, Joe Smith, his starting point for salary negotiations was $2,061,000. And then that went all the way down to the 29th pick in 1995's first round, Corey Alexander, who started off at $412,000. And I say that was their starting point because teams and players can agree to any number that is between 80% and 120% of that starting point. Almost always, to the point that I don't know any examples of this not happening, almost always the player gets the full 120% of the rookie scale just by tradition. I'm sure it's happened before where a player gets a little less, but most projections have 120% of the rookie scale baked into them. So I hope that was educational. Now that we have established the stakes of, what selecting someone with a first round pick can entail, what I'm going to do is read off all of the first round picks that were moved off of within a year of being drafted. And for most draft classes, talk about 1 to 2 players that are more interesting than the rest to me. So we'll start with 1995 and work our way up to the 2021 draft. So 1995, Rasheed Wallace, the 4th overall pick to the Washington Bullets, he was traded to Portland for Rod Strickland and Harvey Grant. Strickland then became the Bullets' starting point guard. Strickland had held out for part of the middle of the last season because he didn't want to play for Blazers coach PJ Carlesimo anymore. But he eventually came back and the Blazers turned their season around and finished the season 18-4 to make the playoffs after being 8 games under 500 in March. The reason that the Bullets moved off of Rasheed Wallace, despite his talent, was because he had been arrested in April of his rookie season for assaulting the mother of his child. Washington just didn't want to put up with that on top of his fiery attitude on the court, which, was a constant for him. He did not ease into it over the years. He just immediately started getting technical fouls as a rookie. So the other one from this draft class I'm going to talk about is Cherokee Parks. Parks was the second center prospect in the 95 draft once Bryant Reeves was off the board, and he, of course, relatively speaking, sucked very badly at basketball. The Mavericks had tried to trade up from the 12th pick to number 6 to pick Reeves, but Vancouver made the pick instead. So the Mavericks shipped Parks to Minnesota in exchange for Minnesota lifting the protections on a pick that the Mavs had received for sending Sean Rooks to Minnesota 2 years beforehand. So instead of the pick that the Mavericks held being top 6 protected in 1997, it was top 1 protected, which didn't matter in the end because by 1997, the Timberwolves were a playoff team already. But yeah, Parks really just was ineffective in his first year in Dallas, and then they moved off from him pretty quickly. Sherrell Ford and Mario Bennett were both waived after the rookie season. So those were the other 2 from this draft class, which means that their respective teams paid them the other 2 guaranteed years of their contract to stay home. 1996, Travis Knight was drafted by the Chicago Bulls out of UConn, but they waived him actually before they even tendered him a contract offer. They decided that he was not going to be worth the $1.5 million guaranteed to the final pick in the first round that year. So Knight is the only first round pick from the rookie scale era for this to happen to. They can be traded, their rights can be traded to another team before they're offered a contract, but Knight is the only guy to be renounced before even being offered a contract. There's also Roy Rogers. Vancouver traded Roy Rogers to Boston after his rookie season for going to the media during his second training camp and saying that the team was going to be worse than last year, which was a year in which the Grizzlies won 14 games. It's kind of a funny one. He was traded to Boston for Tony Massenberg. The other players from this draft were moved off of. Martin Mersep was traded midseason for Jamal Mashburn. And then there are 4 other guys, John Wallace, Eric Dampier, Walter McCarty, and then a great name, Priest Lauderdale. 1997, Chauncey Billups, he was actually traded twice within a year of being drafted. The Celtics and the Raptors both traded him. I know he's considered to be kind of a late bloomer, but he was a starter for both the Celtics and the Raptors, so it's very strange that 2 teams would quickly move on from a rookie who was the 3rd overall pick. Now, I will say, it's unclear how much the lawsuit against him for allegedly raping a woman in Boston had to do with him getting traded twice so quickly because there was barely any reporting about that incident at the time. So, that may have been the reason that they both traded him, but it's unclear from the reporting. There's also Antonio Daniels. He was the 4th pick in the draft. Daniels was drafted by Vancouver. He clashed with Vancouver's coach, Brian Hill, and their veteran power forward Otis Thorpe because he really just wasn't as good as, a fourth overall pick should be. Vancouver did expect way too much from him too soon, but that really wasn't his fault. His draft stock rose a bit too high for him to live up to. He was drafted fourth after a good senior season at Bowling Green State University. So, he's not playing the cream of the crop night in, night out, but he was traded from the worst team in the league to the San Antonio Spurs. So he won a title as a backup in his second season. So I would say that Antonio Daniels won that trade. The others from this draft class are Charles Smith. He was traded mid-season. And then Tony Battie, John Taylor, John Thomas, Scott Pollard, and Bobby Jackson. 1998, Michael Dickerson. Dickerson was a surprisingly good two-way player for a rookie for the Rockets, but he was included in the Rockets trade for Steve Francis, which is a worthwhile gamble for Houston. They really weren't that great with Francis until Yao Ming came along, but he was worth it in ticket sales at the very least. The other person from the 98 draft, Pat Garrity, he was traded for Penny Hardaway after his rookie season. 1999, Corey Maggette, he was salary dumped to the Los Angeles Clippers after his rookie season so that the Orlando Magic could make room to trade for Grant Hill and Tracy McGrady. Maggette put up numbers, but it's not like he was a great player or anything like that. The other two from the 99 draft that were moved off of after the season were Alexander Radievich and Tim James. The 2000 draft, not a lot of winners in this draft. One of the worst drafts of all time, if not the worst. Only 3 players, surprisingly, were moved off of from this first round. Jerome Moiso, not to be confused with the recently assassinated, well, I don't know how recently, it was over a year ago, but that would be Jovenel Moïse, the president of Haiti. This is a different guy. Then also Courtney Alexander, he was traded mid-season for Juwan Howard, and then Mateen Cleaves traded for John Barry and a first-round pick afterward. 2001, Joe Johnson. This is another instance of the Boston Celtics moving on from a young future all-star in the middle of their rookie season. This trade, in hindsight, of course, absolutely horrible. The Celtics sent Joe Johnson and a first-round pick for Tony Delk and Rodney Rogers, neither of whom started a single game in the playoffs that year. Really weird trade. This wasn't even Rick Pitino. This was after Rick Pitino. This was Chris Wallace, who is also a dumbass and a very bad executive. So, the Celtics, between 93 and 2008, it was rough sailing for them. The other two from this draft who were traded after their rookie seasons were Rodney White and Joseph Forte. 2002, I'm not going to count Jay Williams in this out of Duke because the Bulls had no choice but to get rid of him after his motorcycle accident that ended his career. Jay Williams, by the way, not licensed to drive a motorcycle and not wearing a helmet when he crashed his motorcycle. So not a very smart thing to do. Ryan Humphrey and Drew Gooden were traded mid-season for each other in a deal that included Mike Miller going from the Orlando Magic to the Memphis Grizzlies. And then the other player from this draft was Yuri Welsh, who was traded after the season for Nick Van Exel. The 2003 draft, Reese Gaines was traded for Steve Francis after the season. Troy Bell was waived after the season. And then this one's really interesting to me. Sasha Pavlovich was left unprotected and drafted in the expansion draft by Charlotte after his rookie season in Utah. But then the very next day, Charlotte traded Pavlovich to Cleveland for a future first-round pick. So this one is mind-boggling to me. I'm not sure what Utah was doing there by leaving him unprotected. I mean, my guess is they probably just had not talked on the phone to the Cavaliers general manager, but, still, it's just kind of strange to me. Here's a patch of uninteresting transactions. 2004, Kirk Snyder traded after the season. 2005, Charlie Villanueva traded after the season. 2006, Cedric Simmons traded after the season. Then we get back into interesting things. 2007, Javaris Crittenden was traded from the Los Angeles Lakers to the Memphis Grizzlies in the middle of the season. Memphis, of course, had not told anybody but the Los Angeles Lakers that Pau Gasol was available and traded Pau way before the trade deadline. That's going to be a story for another day. The other one from this draft who was traded after their rookie season, Yi Jianlian, he was traded for Richard Jefferson after the season. Kind of got his wish, though, because he initially didn't want to play for Milwaukee and wanted to go somewhere else that had a larger Chinese population than Milwaukee had. New Jersey, famously, very close to New York, so lots of every kind of person there. 2008, this is one of the stranger ones that I think I'm going to make a full episode about. Joe Alexander, his third-year option was declined after his first season. He was traded in the middle of his second season, but he hadn't played because of injury. One of the very few people to have their third-year options declined, much like Jalen Smith from the Pacers, who was initially drafted by the Suns. Joe Alexander was pretty bad and struggled with injury, so it did make sense. But, he was the 8th overall pick in the 2008 draft. You'd think that Milwaukee would want to hold on to him, but yeah. So then he was traded. He played 8 games for Chicago the next season, and then that was the end of his NBA career. The other two, Ryan Anderson and Courtney Lee, both traded after their rookie seasons for Vince Carter. 2009 draft, Darren Collison, he was traded for Trevor Ariza after his rookie season. This was a worthwhile trade for New Orleans, but Darren Collison did do really, really well for the New Orleans Hornets when Chris Paul missed some time, but they opted to trade for Trevor Ariza, which is usually a pretty good decision, and then go with Jarrett Jack as the backup instead. And then Jordan Hill was traded for Tracy McGrady in the middle of the season, and Eric Maynor was salary dumped in the middle of the season. 2010 draft, Quincy Pondexter, he was traded for Grievous Vasquez after his rookie season. Grievous Vasquez traded for Quincy Pondexter after the season. These two were traded for each other. Pretty funny to me. Derek Favors traded in the middle of his rookie season for Darren Williams. And the others from this draft, there's a lot from the 2010 draft. Al-Farouq Aminu traded after. Xavier Henry traded after the season. Lazar Hayward salary dumped after. And Jordan Crawford traded in the middle of the season for Kirk Heinrich. 2011, Nikola Vucevic, he was traded in the Dwight Howard and Andrew Bynum deal after his rookie season. This deal got the 76ers Andrew Bynum, which was great content. Bynum, of course, never played for the 76ers. And then after his rookie season, Jawan Johnson was traded for Courtney Lee. 2012 draft, this is going to be another future episode. Royce White. His generalized anxiety disorder prevented him from flying to games, so his career was kind of doomed from the start. You got to fly a lot in the NBA, folks. He had talent, but the Rockets really screwed up by taking him with the 16th pick. There were still plenty of good players left on the board. It is very interesting to me. If somebody is outright telling you they can't fly to games, why would you use a first-round pick on them? I'm not sure. Another guy, Tony Wroten. I thought that Tony Wroten was going to be the future for the Memphis Grizzlies. I was so upset when he played well for the process 76ers, and we gave him up for nothing. But he was the Sixers tank commander supreme that year, so good for him. The others from this draft, Thomas Robinson traded midseason, Kendall Marshall traded midseason, Fab Melo traded after the season, Jared Cunningham traded after the season, and Miles Plumlee traded after. 2013, Anthony Bennett, worst number 1 pick of all time. The 2013 draft was very bad, but he still should not have gone number 1. He should have gone like 6 through 10. Maybe could have even been okay if he landed somewhere else, but just the expectations of having the number 1 pick on his head, bad for him. The Cavs, though, did get something good out of him by throwing him into the trade for Kevin Love alongside Andrew Wiggins. So the Cavs, they took their ridicule, but they won in the end. Shane Larkin traded after the season. Sergei Karasev dumped after his first season, and Nemanja Nedovic waived after his first season. 2014, one of the greatest to ever do it, Nick Stauskas, salary dumped after his first season after the incredible video from inside the Sacramento Kings draft war room where everybody's going, Stauskas. The Kings, of course, then also attached a future first-round pick that became, I believe, it was either Jason Tatum or Markelle Fultz. I can't remember the order. I think the 76ers held that pick. I'm vamping here, folks. I don't know. All I can say about this is that Nick rocks. Other people from the 2014 draft, Noah Vonleh traded after the season. Adrian Payne traded after the season. Tyler Ennis traded mid-season. And Shabazz Napier traded from your Miami Heat. Shabazz Napier, the guy who was going to get LeBron James to stay in Miami. 2015 draft, Jerian Grant was traded for Derrick Rose after his first season. RJ Hunter, he was waived after his first season by the Boston Celtics. 2016 draft, Chris Dunn traded for Jimmy Butler. Buddy Hield traded mid-season for DeMarcus Cousins. Wade Baldwin IV waived after his first season. Horrible. Although, I will say, he was better than the guy that I was so upset that the Grizzlies weren't able to get Denzel Valentine. Although, who's laughing now? Denzel Valentine had a longer career than Wade Baldwin did, but I was under the impression that Denzel Valentine was going to be the next superstar in the NBA because he had a lot of rebounds and assists in his senior season. What do I know? And then Domantas Sabonis traded for Paul George after his first season. Indiana really, really got good value trading Paul George. They got Oladipo and Sabonis back. To get those two back is some really fair value. I mean, Paul George is a star, but like to get Oladipo and Sabonis back is pretty good. 2017 draft, Justin Patton. He's the only one. He was traded alongside Jimmy Butler to Philadelphia after his first season. I guess in the middle of his second season, technically, but he barely played for Minnesota. He played exactly 4 minutes for Minnesota. No great loss for them. One of the most injury-prone guys that you'll ever hear about. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he was traded for Paul George after his first season. You hate to give up such talent because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, from the start, it was clear that he was talented, but giving him up was well worth it considering you get Paul George in return and then Kawhi Leonard is going to join you as a free agent. I think the Clippers are going to make the finals this year and may even win it all, while Shai is still kind of a tank commander in OKC now. So unfortunate for him. One of the most talented tank commanders we've ever seen, but still a tank commander nevertheless. Also from this draft, Landry Shamet traded mid-season for Tobias Harris. Grayson Allen traded after his first season for Mike Conley. Moritz Wagner traded for Anthony Davis after his first season. And Omari Spellman traded after his first season for Warriors center Damian Jones. 2019 draft, Ty Jerome traded after his rookie season to get Chris Paul. Pretty good deal. Also in this draft, Kevin Porter Jr. traded for a second-round pick after his first season. KPJ was dumped to the Rockets because he had what Sports Illustrated describes as a temper tantrum. I had forgotten about this, actually, so I was glad that this came up. Kevin Porter, had his locker in the Cavs locker room, but the Cavaliers acquired Taurean Prince from the Brooklyn Nets, and they gave Prince the locker that Porter Jr. had, relocated Porter Jr. to a group of lockers, I think on the opposite wall, they said, where most of the rookies and the other young players had their lockers. Well, KPJ didn't like that. He started yelling and screaming. JB Bickerstaff said he said some pretty harsh and demeaning things, and this was the final straw for the Cavs. Porter Jr. had already, within the past few months, been arrested and charged with improper handling of a firearm in a motor vehicle, which means it was loaded, failure to control the vehicle, meaning he was probably weaving through traffic, and possession of marijuana. Who cares? But apparently he also threw some food. Not the first time that somebody has thrown food in anger in the Caps locker room. Unclear if it was chicken tortilla soup like the last time. 2020 draft, Precious Achiuwa traded after his rookie season by the Heat for Kyle Lowry, doing well up in Toronto. And then RJ Hampton traded in the middle of his first season for Aaron Gordon. Pretty good value. And then the last guy we're going to talk about, Keon Johnson. He was traded in the middle of his first season from the LA Clippers to the Portland Trail Blazers. He was just a bench guy for the Clippers, but he played much better and had an actual role on the hobbled Blazers when he arrived in Portland. I'm sure he'll be a passable NBA player, but the opportunity to trade a bunch of random stuff, Keon Johnson, Justice Winslow, and Eric Bledsoe for Robert Covington and Norm Powell, I would take that deal every time. So another solid move by the Clippers. Something you'd never think you would say in the Doc Rivers era, or especially the Elgin Baylor era, but the tides have turned. The Clippers are the functional franchise in Los Angeles now, and we should all just get used to it. I don't like it, but I accept it. So that's all for that. I wanted to debut a new segment here that I'm going to put at the end of each episode called I Come in Peace. So what this segment entails is just me reading a Reddit post of a fan of a certain team, making a post on another team's subreddit to either tell the fans to, cherish a certain player that used to play for the poster's team, that the poster likes a certain young player on their team, to ease the tension between the two fan bases, before or after a big game, offer an olive branch. These posts do not need to happen. Nobody likes these posts, and people should have stopped doing them years ago. But nevertheless, they persist. And here's our first one. This is a Clippers fan posting on the Minnesota Timberwolves subreddit. The title of this post is pretty fitting. It is, I Come in Peace. Clippers fan, I know, but I just wanted to say a few things. Number one, Pat Bev is a national treasure, and please enjoy him to the fullest extent. Number two, Anthony Edwards is an absolute all-star. Number three, Fuck Scott Foster. Nobody wants to see a free throw contest. 4, please go and beat the Grizz. Also, and then he links to a tweet from Andrew Grief, and it says, Pat Bev just walked by the media room as Ty Lue was exiting and said, see y'all in the Western Conference Finals. And then the post continues, best of luck. You beat us fair and square, including an amazing fourth quarter comeback. All the respect in the world. Hopefully we meet again in a full series later in the playoffs. Well, the Clippers didn't make the playoffs, and the Timberwolves blew several fourth quarter leads to the Memphis Grizzlies. But yeah, just someone going into another team's subreddit to say that they respect the team for some reason. Strange thing that many Redditors do. I don't follow any other sports other than basketball and soccer, so I don't peruse like NFL team subreddits or anything like that. So I'd be curious to know if this is just a basketball thing or if there are weirdos in every sports fandom. But I'll never find out. I'm too busy reading old Grand Junction Daily Sentinel newspaper articles so I can bring you a high-quality podcast experience. If you'd like me to continue doing that, please consider following the show on whatever platform you're listening on. Also follow the socials at Backfired NBA Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. I recorded an episode of Greatest Games Never Played. It's going to be a good one. They said that they'd let me know when it's coming out, so I'll plug that again in the episode of Backfired that's released after that one drops. But it's an episode about the Vancouver Grizzlies. Really appreciate Andrew and Alex from GGNP for having me on. Appreciate them doing a lot of in-depth research for that one. You know, they knew their stuff, so it was a really fun conversation. But yeah, that's going to be it for me. Thank you very much for listening, and we will talk next week. All right, have a good one.
Baby, are you gonna be the one that saves me? And after all, you're my wonder wall.